Hi there, welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions. Today, the sun is finally shining. We have had so much rain. Every time I look at our 2-week forecast, it is rain with like maybe 1 to 2 days of respite. So it is really nice to see some blue peeking out there because it was actually raining this morning. But we've got some sun coming, so it felt just right to throw on my, I think, only summer design I have. That's purposely like a lighter weight. I need more. I just always forget about them until summer, and then I know by the time I'm done knitting them, it'll be cold again. And it's hard for me to knit them in the cooler months because I'm all wool all the time. I'm just a woolly girl. It is hard for me to grab those linen and cotton yarns, so gotta do something about that. When I got to go teach in Tulum earlier this year for a knitting retreat and everyone had their amazing summer knits, I was pretty jealous. I was like, oh, I really need to do that. So, or maybe I'll just treat myself and knit somebody else's design because there are some pretty great summertime designers with lots of great patterns. Anyways, I digress. This is Velocore. It is knit up, sadly, in a yarn that is not in production anymore. It is Yoth Fibers Best Friend, I believe this one's called. It's a cotton wool blend, and it is my favorite cotton wool blend I think I've ever used. It is just so delightful. The reason I do tend to not knit a ton with cotton and wool is it can just be really hard on my hands. The lack of elasticity just makes my hands sore, but I tend to do okay with a blend. So I really loved this one because a lot of the other cotton wool blends I've used have been a heavier weight, like worsted or DK. So it was nice. This one I think is even. I think they call it maybe a light fingering or a heavy lace weight. So it's on the finer side, but anyways, this is it. If you're lucky, you might be able to still get a couple skeins of it on the Tote website. Every once in a while, I'll see a few skeins up there. But shall we answer some questions? I'm kind of wishing I had already made my coffee before I started this. I just got hit with kind of the tiredness. Why does that happen? All right, we gotta just perk up. Okay, let's do some questions. I am so excited to finally be making plans for the Spark cardigan, which I've had sitting in my Ravelry library for years. I'm planning on hand spinning the contrast color. I have mostly done fractal 2-ply when I spin or I chain ply. I want to try spinning a 3-ply for this project that isn't a chain ply. How would you spin the fiber to achieve the most success? How do you divide the braids? I'll have 3 braids to work with. So you could just have the same plan for all 3 bags of your fiber for all 3 braids, where you could fractal spin each one, just doing a 3-ply fractal spin. So if you wanted to go about it that way, I would just take the braid out, unbraid it so that it's just one big long strip of fiber, and then you're going to strip it vertically, just like you do for a 2-ply fractal, but you're just going to do it 3 times. So I would split it into 3 even sections, as even as you can get them. And I would keep one of those whole. You're going to spin one of those to a bobbin. Then with the other 2, the second one, I would divide into 2 vertically, spin both of those to a bobbin. And then for your third section, I would divide that either into 3 or 4. It's up to you. Basically, it's just going to change how quickly your color changes happen. Now, so that being said, so that is the like basic, there you go, 3-ply fractal with your braid. But considering you're doing a larger project, you want to do a sweater, you could also play around with basically combining 2 of those braids for the body and then spinning the 3rd braid for your sleeves. So the way I would kind of think about it in my head, and I would make sure that you have enough fiber. I don't know that 12 ounces is enough. It might be. I don't know. Yeah, it's been a while since I knit that sweater too. But just make sure you have enough. But the idea that popped into my head when I first read your question was I would take, and I've been thinking about this for a while. I'm actually about to do a cardi spin. I showed y'all this yarn last week. This was just the remnants of a 2-ply yarn that I was making, and I had a bunch of this braid left. And so I turned it into a center pole ball and plied it into a 2-ply, and then I swatched it, and I just love it. So I'm gonna make this a cardi. So I'm also thinking about, okay, how do I want to spin? I mean, isn't that so pretty? How do I want to spin this yarn for my cardi? You could just not worry too much about it, especially in something like the Spark cardi that it's all over color work. So everything doesn't have to match up perfectly. It's still gonna look great. But if you want to kind of add a little challenge, one of the things we have to think about is you're going to knit some of that yarn large circumference for your body, but then you're also going to knit some of that yarn small circumference for your arms. And the rate at which that color changes in that fractal is going to change drastically between the large circumference and the small circumference. When I'm knitting with commercial yarn like I did for the Spark cardi, I didn't worry about it. I just let my hair down and enjoyed the process. But as spinners, we have some control over that. So one thing you could think about doing, I'm just really burying the lead here. Whew, let's get to the good stuff. So one thing you could think about doing is take one of those braids and let it be for your sleeves and spin it just how I mentioned in the first part of answering this question. Traditional kind of 3-ply fractal. For your other 2 braids, I would treat that as one giant fractal so that your color shifts a little more slowly with the body of the sweater. So I would take one braid and I would spin that whole braid end to end onto a single bobbin, if you can fit it onto a bobbin, but it doesn't matter. Divide it amongst bobbins as you need. You should be able to fit that on one bobbin though. But spin that one braid top to bottom, end to end. Your other braid, divide into 2, and then you're going to take one section, divide again into 2, and then your third section and divide that again into either 3 or 4. So do you see how we're still doing the same thing we did with the single braid? We're just moving that over 2 braids so that you can get slower color changes for the body circumference. And you can play around. I mean, you don't have to divide it exactly how I said, but that's just to give you kind of an example. I thought about using this to draw what I mean, just in case that's helpful. But this is, then I looked closer at what it is. This is actually a picture that my son drew for me the other day of me sitting at my desk plying yarn. That's my little electric wheel. Here's my windows, which are right there. So he came up and he held it up to make sure everything was how it is in real life. So anyways, that's my messy bun that he always draws for me. So I gotta hang that on my wall. But anyways, there you go. That's what I would do. That's what I think I'm gonna do for this spin. I think that I am going to, so I have 6 braids because this whole sweater will be knit with this yarn. It's not going to be color work. It's just going to be all over like this. And so I'm thinking about taking those 6 braids and I'll probably save 2 for the sleeves, spin them fractal, how I described when we first began. And then the body I will turn into a bigger fractal with my remaining 4 braids, however I see fit. I'll either do 2 big ones, like using 2 braids on each, or maybe I'll even get real crazy and use the 4, because I could take the 4, no, that would be a 4-ply. It would be kind of fun, and I promise I'm going to land the plane here, but I do think it would be kind of fun to take 3 braids and have each one be a ply. So braid 1, I'm going to spin end to end. Braid 2, I'm going to divide into 2 pieces and then spin those end to end. And then braid 3, I would either divide into 3 or 4 pieces and spin those end to end. And that would be pretty awesome fractal for the body. I think that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll just have to decide what I would do for the 6th. But that's neither here nor there. I do have to think, I am thinking about doing this as one of my Tour de Fleece spins though. So after I end this, I'm just going to have a little daydream out the window and I'm going to come up with a plan. Feel free to throw in your votes down below. What should I do? Is that how I should divide? Because I don't think I would need more. I think one braid per. You know what I could do? And I swear I'm going to end this. But you know what I think I could do? I think I could maybe do 3 braids as that traditional smaller fractal. And I could also use that for like the button bands and the ribbing. And then use big boy for the body. And the other one's for the sleeves. We shall see. I will let you know how it progresses. All right, next question. So we are starting off the day with a couple spinning ones here. But this one is not just about spinning. So all of my non-spinners, don't worry. This is actually, I love these kinds of questions that just make you think about life and balance and all those things. So I've been totally spinfluenced by you to start spinning. Yay! I'm in Australia and my Opa has a little farm and has gifted me a luscious merino fleece and gave me his old Ashford traditional wheel, which was sitting in his living room for decoration. He really is the best. I mean, how sweet is that? Just living the Australian dream over there. Would love to know how you juggle your different crafting interests without losing hope that you won't want to go back to a craft you've currently lost interest in. I started knitting 2 years ago, and in the last year have gotten into spinning, processing fleece, and natural dyeing. Now I don't have much knitting mojo as I'd rather process and dye. I have limited time as a busy mom of 2 little kiddos and wondering if there's hope juggling all of these, or should I just stick to one thing? So I completely can relate to those feelings. Sometimes, especially if you've invested in a craft, in a hobby, in a creative pursuit, I think then we can put pressure on ourselves to make in that field. So sometimes I've felt that way with my weaving or my sewing. Those don't get quite as much time as my knitting or my spinning. But here has been my own journey through the years with all the different things I like to do, because I would say I have 4.5 solid creative outlets: knitting, my ride or die, spinning, sewing, baking and cooking, and weaving. Weaving's my half. I'm still getting into it. I need to dress my loom because that is one that I am afraid I'm going to lose if I do not use it. Like, I've got to make time for it. But I think that I like to think of our creativity as this like wonderful gift, and we don't have to try and force it into anything that it's not. So right now, knitting might just not be your priority. It might not be your jam. You're feeling filled up and joyful while you spin or put up a fleece or natural dye. Those are the things that are lighting you up. And knitting will always be there. It's not going anywhere. And that's how I think about sewing and even spinning. In the beginning for me, I was so afraid, especially after investing in a wheel. A wheel is a big investment. And I was really afraid that I was going to spend money on a wheel and then it was just going to sit and collect dust. And instead, what I found is a lot of my other crafts besides knitting, again, it's just my primary, but for you, that may end up being spinning or dyeing. And what I find with everything else is they tend to be very seasonal. I end up having that sewing bug hit me in the spring. Spinning, a lot of times it depends on how much I'm traveling at that time for work and for other things. So, and weaving is still trying to find its place, but they do all tend to come back. So there are times, again, that I will look at like my languishing little fabric stash over there and my sewing machines, and I'm like, I should be using this stuff. I should be making these things. And I just don't think we have to put that pressure on ourselves, because there will probably be a moment where you will make and dye some beautiful yarn and will want to see it come to fruition. You will want to see, like, what fabric is this destined to make, and how does this spin it up? I mean, that's the thing I love about spinning, and I think that spinning can be even more fulfilling when we use that yarn. Now, you don't have to. The spin can be your end goal. That can be you finishing that make. You don't have to do anything further with that yarn. But for me, what I have found is when I do knit with my hand spun, I learn so much about the way I'm spinning, about the way I am treating the colors that have been dyed on that fiber, if it is dyed fiber. There's just so much nuance that goes into it. And I don't think you can fully know what that yarn's gonna do until you turn it into fabric, whether it be, knitting, crocheting, weaving. But that only rounds out the spinning experience more for me by then knitting it and turning it into fabric. So basically all I'm saying is follow your heart, follow your joy. And also, if you are a mom of 2 young kids, you didn't say how old they were, but know that you will have more time in your life as they get a little older. I mean, my kids are still young. They're 9 and 7, but they are so much more independent than they were at 2 and 4 when they were still at you're following them around, So you will have more time, and then you might find that knitting speaks to you again. And if it doesn't, and you're making all this yarn, you don't know what to do with it, there are plenty of people who would probably love to knit or weave or crochet your hand spun. So life's too short to do things that aren't filling us up and bringing us joy, especially if it is a hobby and a creative outlet that is meant to fill you back up, especially during parenthood. Like for me, that was so major. That's what helped me be a better mom, is I knew that if I could have that little bit of time, even if it was just knitting a few stitches, I knew that by filling up that little bit, I then had more to give my family. So do what brings you joy. Don't sweat anything else. It will always be there if you need it and want it. Oh, and just to give you like an actual tangible answer to that question, I will say there are times when I'm not making space for something, but I know it would make me feel good if I did. That's when I do like 15 minutes a day. And I get up before the rest of my family. I wake up every morning between 5:15 and 5:30, just naturally. It's when my eyes pop open. And then I sneak downstairs and I make my caffeinated beverage of choice for the day, usually coffee, sometimes my matcha. And that is when I try to allow myself to be creative in a way of no expectations. So I try not to really do design work in the morning. I try not to do my job with that first cup of coffee. I try to ask myself what would fill me up the most in this moment. And sometimes it is revitalizing my making that has maybe started to languish in the corner. So it might be tracing out a pattern to sew. It might be dressing the loom. It might be sitting down at my spinning wheel. It might be knitting, because I love knitting, but I will just gift myself that little window of time. And it's kind of like how they say, if you're having trouble working out, like having physical activity in your life, just commit to 10 minutes. And when those 10 minutes are up, you're still like, don't want to do this, then fine, stop. So you can do that with your whatever creative pursuit that you want to revitalize. You can be like, okay, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes. If it's not bringing me joy, I'm going to go do the thing that brings me joy. I will also say, this apparently just has me thinking all the thoughts. So we're going to have some long answers today, apparently, even without the coffee. But could it also be sometimes what I see is people's mojo in a craft dwindles, gets sad, when they're stuck on a project that they're not enjoying. So what do you have on your needles? How long has it been on your needles? Is it time to maybe just frog that project? Maybe it's a project you love, but you're just like, I'm just not feeling like it. Cast on a little tiny palette cleanser, do a hat, do a pair of socks, do something that you can bust out and complete and pat yourself on the back for a job well done that you finished a project. And a lot of times that will be the boost to the knitting mojo, or whatever mojo you need boosted, is doing a little palette cleanser project, or saying, hey, it's okay that I've decided not to finish this one that I thought I was going to enjoy, but I'm not. So great thing about being a knitter is you can unravel it and reuse that yarn for something you are enjoying. So there you go. There's my TED Talk on the mojo and fitting in all the crafts. And it can be overwhelming. I have a deep love for making, and sometimes to the point that it feels a little obsessive, and I will feel like, oh my gosh, I will never be able to do all that I want to do in my life. And maybe I should just stop sleeping. But I need my sleep and I love my sleep. So I have to have a little talk with myself and say, Andrea, you will get done what you get done. You will make what is important to you to make it that time. And you just keep going, one day at a time. Okay. So, hi, Andrea. I am a new spinner and blah, 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 blah. And joining your attune, it's like I need to do like some of those mouth exercises people do when they are about to give like a speech. Okay, sorry. I am joining your Attune Shawl spin along. Yay! The spinning is going well so far, but you mentioned that you rewind your bobbins before you ply them. Do you rewind them the same direction you spun them or the same way you intended to ply them? I spin Z twist and ply S twist. I am sorry if this is an obvious question. I would like to learn to do it the correct way. So happy to clarify this one. So you are not adding or removing any twist to that yarn to your singles. So don't think about it. So I think you're thinking about running that yarn through your wheel. You're not doing that. What you are doing is you are taking it. Do you see me looking for bobbins? You are just taking, oh, I got some. Just holding bobbins. I don't know why I think you guys need a visual, but all you're doing is you are taking the yarn you have spun onto one bobbin and you are going to put it onto a new bobbin. And the reason we do that is we finished our yarn here, but the end we started spinning tucked up on that shaft in the middle of my bobbin. So by taking this end and getting it onto a new bobbin, once it's done winding on there, the start that I will have will be the same end I started spinning my original first single with. And this is typically when you're doing this, I wouldn't do this for a woolen spun yarn. Some people might though. I think about it more for a worsted spun yarn. So think about it like this. Also, I'm just going to pause here and say, I do not do this every time. You do not have to do this for the spin along. It is just a fun technique to try out to see if you like how it affects your finished yarn. So 100% you don't have to do this. But it is fun to try out, and I was surprised by the outcome the first time I did it. So when we are spinning a yarn, worsted, when we're drafting worsted, so maybe it's a short forward, maybe it's a short backward, what we're doing is we are smoothing that fiber and we are pushing out that air, and we're smoothing all the little hairs on it down. So when we don't rewind our bobbins onto new ones, we're starting with the end we finished with. We're going to start plying. Well, now our hands are moving down in the opposite direction on that singles than the way we spun it. So now we're roughing up all that smoothing we did as we drafted. So if you take your yarn, put it onto a new bobbin, you are now going in the same direction that you spun your singles. They're going on as you ply, so that you are smoothing it even more. So it's going to help that worsted spun yarn be smooth and lustrous and pretty and all those things, instead of roughing it up in the other direction. I hope this is clear. So yeah. Now the way you would do this is, I have a quill for my Hansen spinner, and it just looks like kind of like a knitting needle that comes out of the end of my orifice. You plug it into the orifice and you can put a bobbin on there. I put my other bobbin I'm winding off of on my Lazy Kate, and you just thread it on. And that's how I do that. I have storage bobbins, sadly. So my storage bobbins are Bobbins Up. They were like $5. They were perfect, but the company went out of business, so you can't get those ones anymore. But I loved those for when I did want to rewind my yarn. Now, I am going to put a link in here because I know that sometimes when somebody's trying to verbalize a technique, it can sound so abstract that it just kind of makes you want to go cross-eyed. So I am going to put a link in here to a whole YouTube video on rewinding your bobbins. I don't even want to say rewind, but my words are failing me to what else I would say. Anyways, I will include, so Tiny Fiber Studio did an absolutely brilliant video on this, which I loved because I was always so happy I had my quill for my Hansen, and I was curious how anyone else would do it without having this whole contraption. You can do, the bobbins up were cool because you could actually use a hand drill, and they came with this, again, kind of, I guess I'll call it a quill, but a little peg you plug in. It looked like a big long bit for your drill, and you would plug it into your drill and you would hold that, and that would, so that your empty bobbin was on there, and again, you could feed all your yarn on there. But again, you are not adding or subtracting any twist from the singles you have spun. You're literally just winding them off of one bobbin onto a new one so you can get back to where you started, so that when you go to ply, you're not undoing some of that work you did as you drafted in a worsted style. Whew, hope that made sense. Can you tell I'm not a spinning instructor? Okay, I have a question about yarn dyeing and its effect on gauge. I just bought a lovely natural 50% final? I'm not familiar with that. And 50% mohair yarn. And I'm planning to dye it with spruce cones sometime during the upcoming weekend. That sounds very fun. Since I received the yarn early, I was wondering if I could already do a gauge swatch, or do you think the yarn will change a lot during the dye process and affect the gauge? It will be my first try to hand dye yarn. So, I have not hand dyed yarn back since I made self-striping sock yarn with Kool-Aid when I lived in New Zealand when I was 20. So it's been a while. But thankfully, I do know from some of my friends who are dyers that different dyes will affect how thick that yarn becomes and its actual like physical weight. So if I'm remembering correctly, I feel like red dye can do that. I would think in most instances it's pretty nominal, but what I think you should do is a gauge swatch now, and then you should do another one after you have dyed it, and you should compare the two, because it would even just make for some real pretty photos of your before and after of your yarn dyeing, especially since this is your first time. So I think it would be fun to swatch both ways and see if it changes, and that'll give you some great information for next time. All right. I actually am doing 6 questions today, even though this is a long video. It's already a long video. But because there were quite a few spinning questions in here, I made sure that there was some an extra knitting one in there too. So we're going to dip back into spinning for a minute, and we're going to go to a knitting question. I have a very newbie spinning question for you. I'm wondering if you have any resources on planning for a larger spin. I'm participating in my first Tour de France and spin along, spinning for the Attune shawl. Yay! I love all these, everybody jumping in on this Attune spin along. It's my first time spinning for an actual project, and I have 3 4-ounce bags of hand-dyed fiber of the same colorway for the contrast color. I'm not sure on the logistics of spinning that much fiber. If I'm spinning for a 2-ply, would I split each bag in half and aim for 3 4-ounce skeins as if I was doing them all individually? Or mix bags and do 2 6-ounce skeins? 1 giant mama skein? Trying not to overthink it too much, but want to set myself up for success. So, the world is your oyster. You can do so many different things, but I am going to try and give some helpful tips here. First, let's talk about the second part of your question when you said, would I do 3 4-ounce skeins, do 2 6-ounce skeins, 1 giant mama skein? One thing to consider. So for my Attune shawl, I use 2 giant mama skeins, but that's because I ply onto my Hansen e-spinner, and that bad boy comes, my bobbin can hold easily 10 ounces. I think I ended up with 9 ounces for my skein, maybe more. It was huge. So unless you have a big old jumbo flyer or some giant bobbins that can accommodate that much fiber, you won't be able to do the giant mama skein, because you'll probably have a regular size bobbin that fits maybe 4 ounces, which would be 1 braid or 1 bag of fiber. So just to kind of help you consider that part. Now, you can really play around with a lot of different ways to mix those colors. You could do a standard 2-ply, just as you said. You could take each bag, divide it in half once, and spin each section to a bobbin, ply them together in a 2-ply, and have 3 skeins of 2-ply yarn. You could divide them vertically as many times as you can, and then spin each one to a bobbin, and then do, ply those together into a 2-ply, and that would mix the color up a little more. What's really interesting is even when we split vertically again and again and again till we have kind of like pencil roving, it will still end up having like a repeat that happens. So that's kind of fun to see that happen. You could do a fractal spin, which I talked about with the first question. You could do the fractal spin that I was considering doing for the body of that sweater. Since you have 3 bags, if you wanted it to be like this beautiful color shifting fractal, you could take bag 1, spin end to end, bag 2, divide it in half, end to end for each half, bag 3, divide that into 3, spin each of those end to end, and then ply the whole thing together. Now that is kind of going the mama skein route, but once you fill up a bobbin, you would just break it and then start plying onto a new bobbin. So the world is your oyster. If you want more resources to help you make that decision, one great free resource is either looking in Ravelry spinning groups or on Instagram at spinner hashtags, because a lot of people will take a picture of the braid they've spun and then the finished yarn. Some people even show the swatch that came of it, and that is so helpful when you are trying to decide how to distribute the color in that braid, because you don't know until you've practiced or until you can see examples of it. Yes, so I said those 2. So other resources I would totally check out are, I'm going to write them down as I see them so that I have some links here. So definitely Yarnitecture by Jillian Moreno, which I have mentioned a million times. It's my favorite spinning book. I think every spinner should have it in their library, and she shows tons of different ways to work those braids with examples. So I found that so helpful. It's one of the things that really got me into combo spinning was her book. A New Spin on Color by Alana Wilcox is another great book. And then what is the name? I'm just going to keep talking, even though y'all aren't going to be able to see me for a second while I find this other book. While I'm looking for this book, I highly recommend, I should bring all these books over and I can actually show them to you. I also recommend Rachel Smith, who is the co-host of the Spin Along. I really recommend her sock class on School of Sweet Georgia, because she shows example after example after example of the braids, how she divided them, how she spun them, and then what that looks like knit up into a sock, which is just like a swatch. And speaking of Rachel Smith, it was her book that I was trying to remember the name of, Unbraided, The Art and Science of Spinning Color. So she wrote this with Katrina Stewart. And again, I mean, the whole point of this book, show you like a page out of it, is it shows how they talk about how they divided those braids differently. And then there's even knit swatches, so you can see the skeins and the swatches. I mean, it's brilliant. So I really find, especially when you're first starting out, it's so nice to see those visuals, because otherwise you just don't know what's going to happen with a braid. It's like when you first try to knit with speckled or variegated yarn or color shifting yarns like Spin Cycle. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. And you don't until you try it, or until brilliant people write books about it. So this is Yarnitecture. This is the one by Jillian merino. I actually just sent this as a gift to my tech editor, who I'm so stoked. She started spinning, and she didn't have this in her library yet. So it's just so helpful. And then here is Alana Wilcox and a new spin on color. Alana also has some great classes online if you're more of I want to take a class than build up a library kind of a person. Whew, I was chatty today. But I think that's it. I couldn't really remember if I showed y'all my first long draw project. Did I show you? I meant to go peek at my video last week. Oh my gosh, which, if you're still watching, bless ya. Last week on Sunday, my husband was like, you didn't post a video on Friday. And I was like, yes, I did. He's like, no, you didn't. I was like, what? You guys, it didn't post. It was ready. It was there. And I must have not hit save to like schedule it. I couldn't believe it. I was actually a little devastated because I've never missed a week. But I didn't technically miss the week because once he told me, I still got it out on Sunday. But I still was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness somebody was paying attention because I did not know that it hadn't posted. So anyways, so this is my first woolen spun long draw project. This is CVM from Never Say Never Farm. You're not going to be able to see that. But this is a farm in Michigan, and it's Glenda Plummer is the shepherdess in Alto, Michigan. And I started the spin a year and a half ago. And I do think there's going to be a little thick and thin in some places. I tried to really shift around my different bobbins to even out the spin as much as I could. But I am so tickled. I mean, I just want to hug it. It is so light and squishy and delightful. And look at that. I mean, those are 5 chunky woolen spun skeins of yarn. I already know what I want to do with it. It's going to be a hot minute before I have time to cast it on, but I'm real excited. And it just feels so good to finish it because it was sitting on my mattress for a year and a half. That poor wheel got so little action because this was just kind of a long spin. But I am really thrilled with how it turned out. I mean, it's just so plump and delightful and airy. It makes me want to do more long draw ASAP. So anyways, I just had to share that. But I am finally going to let y'all go. Again, if you have stuck around to the end, thank you so much. And thank you for all of your questions that get me thinking about my making and my life and my creativity and getting to just gush about the things that bring me endless joy every single day of my life. I am just so grateful. So thank you for tuning in, asking your questions, and being here. I hope you get some time this weekend to make something, whether it is hobbies with fiber, whether it's in the kitchen, or whether it's just memories with your family. I hope you have a good one, and I hope to see you back here next week. Bye.